who would I be in the absence of my concerns? I'd feel a lot lighter. I wouldn't be worrying about the things that I worry about. Uh, I would let it rip more in business, or I would let it rip more in my, my social life, or any of these things. I would enjoy the moment more.
It's said that if you stop being curious, you stop growing. I'm David Wiley. This is Dave Wants to Know.
Well, welcome everyone back to Dave Wants to Know. Of course, I am Dave, and we're pleased to have you back for another episode. Make sure you hit that subscribe button as we get started. Our guest today is so cool. It is Chris Woods, certified professional coach and the author of the book, Balls and Brains, a framework for living your best life by overcoming fears and maximizing strengths. Chris, welcome to the show.
Dave, it's so great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, so you kind of have a PG-ish title there, and I see it on your hat. Tell us about where that title for your book comes from.
So the intention is, at this age of short attention spans, was to get attention. So that stop the scroll. People are like, what's balls and brains? And really what it is the balls part of it is gaining awareness around your fears, the fears that are holding you back from being the best possible version of yourself. And then the brains part of it is gaining an awareness around your strengths, the stuff that you're really good at, and seeing if maybe you could be doing them more than you're currently doing. So I use it as kind of a way to invite a conversation, mostly with men who don't normally want to talk about fears. So I use it as a good onboarding way to talk about fears and strengths, and then we build career plans after that.
It's definitely attention getting. Talking about fears, I read that you grew up in kind of a tough neighborhood in Boston. In fact, the same neighborhood where Good Will Hunting kind of takes place.
Same general area.
What was that like? Yeah, that
Well,
general area.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough upbringing. But I didn't know any better, right? I knew that this was what it was, and this was how it was. But what I learned during it, and I mentioned this in the book, was that, the people who really ascended, at least in high school, were either really, really tough or really, really good athletes. And I was like the mid on both of those things. So I just needed
Right.
to find my way through. But I did have some intelligence, and I did have some drive. So I think growing up that way, instilled some resilience and some toughness. And I think it definitely served me well as I ended up ascending through corporate jobs and then working at Google for several years. I think it gave me the ability to have a foundation of resilience to go along with some intelligence.
There must have been struggles though along the way. You don't just wake up and go, I'm resilient. As far as getting to those levels, where were you learning this stuff, or were you just picking it up observational?
So I kind of was born into it. I'm the youngest of five. My dad died when I was 2. My mom went to wake him up, and he was dead in the bed. So I just always remember growing up, without a dad, and kind of the post trauma of all of that. So I think that also instilled with me kind of a sense of urgency that I wanted to, once I got into the professional world, I wanted to achieve in case I went earlier than most people expect. So I think that really set the tone early, and then it was full immersion, kind of just growing up that way. So then once I was able to get some distance from it, when I ended up moving to New York and going to graduate school, and then getting into professional jobs, that the culture and the life was very different. I think it gave me the ability to kind of find a balance between leveraging my balls and my brains.
Now, and so at some point you end up at Google, which I'm sure you worked at several places, but that's the one everybody knows about. What was that like, and what kind of pressures do you face working for a huge corporation like that?
Sure, it was an amazing experience, a great, great company. And it wasn't as big as it is now when I got there. It got bigger. So I joined in '06, right before they bought YouTube and started to get more expanded beyond just, search advertising. So I was recruited because they were looking to bring in salespeople who could sell more than just search advertising. So I had been doing those things at a cinema advertising business in New York. And so when I got there in '06, it wasn't a startup, but it was still on its way to kind of growing and scaling. So those first few years, was still an environment where you could come up with things, and you had some kind of creativity, particularly around the sales standpoint. And I sold kind of one of the first big YouTube deals after we got the company, because no one really knew what the heck we were doing with it, right? You were able to kind of experiment and start coming up with some things. And then as I stayed through 2013, it continued to become a much bigger company, and then became things were much more standardized from a sales standpoint, which you would need to, right? They're up to 183,000 people at this point. So they can't have cowboys like me going out, doing their own thing. So as that started to evolve more towards a kind of rigid and structured corporate life, that's when I started to realize that that wasn't as strong for me. So I ended up taking one of those Clifton's Strength Finders, which is something I now use with my coaching clients, and it just really put it in black and white for me, the type of things that I'm really good at and what I like to do. And it kept saying that I belonged in entrepreneurial environments and turnaround environments. So where I could go in and kind of fix things or build things. So that's what I ended up eventually doing when I left Google, was, heeding the inner call that really got brought out through those Clifton Strength Finders. So I now lean on that in a lot of the conversations that I have with my clients, because I know how impactful it can be to then be able to say, how much of this are you actually doing? Because this is what you're built to do.
Interesting. But at some point, I believe when you were 40, you hit a major life change, so to almost a death change. Tell us a little bit about what happened when you were 40.
Yeah. So when I was 40, I flatlined in the hospital for a little over a minute. As it turns out, I ended up with cardiac Lyme disease. So it's a form of Lyme disease that comes from a tick bite that goes right in and attacks your heart. And not everybody who gets cardiac Lyme disease flatlines, but my body had this, what they call the sinister vasovagal reaction to it. And so they called Code Blue and brought me back with the paddles. And I woke up in a room full of the best doctors in the world at Mass General in Boston. And they were like, Mr. Woods, we're going to keep you in here until we figure this out. And so, long story short, they kept me in, and they just think that it was a one off. I did have these things called vasovagal syncope a few times in my life, where your blood pressure drops and you can lose consciousness for like 5 seconds. But this one was
Hmm.
what they called a sinister vasovagal. And I flatlined. So had I not been in the hospital at the time, I would have been a goner. So they installed a pacemaker in my chest. I was working for Google at the time, and what I always remember is they, when they were looking at the pacemakers, they also ran my insurance, and I had the best insurance in the world right there. And they were like, you have the best insurance in the world. We can give you the Maserati of pacemakers. And I was like, I want the Maserati of pacemakers. So I am a proud owner of the Maserati of pacemakers right now. But yeah, when you
Good for you.
flatline at 40 and then come back, it definitely, um, kicks off a lot of introspection.
Why, I would bet that how did that change your mindset? So you're already kind of leaning toward leadership and that corporate lifestyle, but I would imagine having essentially a near death experience that your whole perspective has to change. But how did it affect you?
So the biggest thing was it gave me time that they said, you now have this thing and we're otherwise giving you a clean bill of health. You should have another 50 years ahead of you. So I'm like, all right, what do I want to do with another 50 years? And in addition to, making sure that I was there to spend time raising my two daughters, I was like, how else do I really want, to live my life? And the two things that I came up with, and this is actually the stuff that I talk about in my book too. So I'm not doing this just to plug the book. I'm doing this to actually answer the question, is
Mhm.
I realized that I had been operating on fear, pretty much has been my major driver for the first 40 years. And giving myself and being given the opportunity to take some time back and look at my thought patterns and my habits about how they were really defaulting through a lens of fear. Do I now have an ability to re-examine them and replace them something with that's more productive and more loving? And then as I mentioned earlier, taking a look at what I want to then apply my talents to, that I'm not doing it now just for a resume or, an income. Those are both still going to be important for after 40. But what have I learned? And now that I've been given this blessing to, take another shot at it, what do I want to do? So it wasn't kind of like overnight. It was more kind of a process that evolved. And I'm just grateful that I had it.
I know you say that there are two things that tend to hold people back. I'm assuming fear is one of them, but I'll let you. What are those two things?
So I think fear is, and so what I always say when people are like, "Yeah, I think so," but like, what do you mean? And fear can show up in a lot of different ways, right? It's not just like terror, it's anxiety, it's depression, but then it's also like, um, what happened a lot of times for me is when I would get opportunities to maybe do new things or learn new things, my first reaction was like, "Oh boy, what if this doesn't go well? And I'm going to be exposed that I'm not as good as everybody thinks that I am." So my thought would be, "Wow, this could be bad." My emotion would be anxiety, and my action would be, "How can I avoid this?" And so that's, how fear shows up for a lot of people when I end up having conversations with them is a lot of times it's fear of failure, and it's fear of once they then get to a point, when you're young, a lot of times you've got nothing to lose. And a lot of times if you've gotten at some level of success in a career, a lot of times it's fear of falling and failing. And it's like, now I have things to lose. So people start playing it safe and they start staying with things that make them unhappy. And the second thing is a lot of times people stay in those same positions in their jobs or in other parts of their lives that aren't making them happy because they're not actually built for their strengths. So like when I bring it back to the story I was mentioning you near the last couple of years at Google, when it ended up becoming, it was more kind of, paint by numbers and structured and robotic, that wasn't really playing to what lights my fire, but they were paying me well and all those things. And I could just ride it out. But my thought was, I want to do the things that actually light me up. And what I always recommend to people is it's a lot easier to feel aligned as opposed to grinding when you're leaning into the things that you're good at. And what I also then say is you don't have to blow up your life for it. But once you identify the things that you're really good at and map them against what you're currently doing, if there's a big difference on that, I'm not saying pull the plug, but I'm saying how do we start shifting and evolving so that we can get you playing to your strengths more, because succeeding is a lot more fun, right? And you'll be a lot more successful when you're playing to your strengths as opposed to grinding.
It's tough though, especially in the current job market that, you don't necessarily have the option to just jump to another job. You may be kind of forced to make the best of where you're at. And is there a mindset that people can take to do that? Because like I said, you can't just jump around jobs. You said that sometimes you can't just pull the plug and start over.
Yeah. So what I always advise people is not to pull the plug and leave the company or do that. What I always try to say is map what your real strengths are against your current, role and responsibilities, and then be able to then have a conversation, if you can, with your boss, if you have a boss, about, when it comes time for your review, is how can you now lean into some of the things that you're really good at, and potentially, and then you have to find your own way with this, is can you, shift some of the responsibilities of things that you're not as good at? So this doesn't work for everybody, but if you're assuming that, listen, I'm staying here for the next couple of years and I want to be able to have an intelligent conversation with, the people that I work with on these things. And it's not throwing it on them, and it's not like, giving them ultimatums. It's more just, this is how I want to be able to take control over my career, and I'm here to, make your life better, boss. And then here's how I would like to evolve it, because me doing these things, I'm even better at this, so I'll make you even look even better. And then, for example, when I say about some of the things that you're not as good at, you might not be able to, but one of the things that I used to do sometimes in companies is like when I was chief revenue officer for a bunch of different companies. And sometimes I would have top salespeople who were really, really good at sales, but they weren't really good at the tracking part of it. about using the CRM or Salesforce, about tracking all the things that they're doing. And, you would need it to run an organization. You're like, things don't exist if they're not in Salesforce. I need you to do these things. And instead of then beating my head against the wall and hammering them and taking them away from the things that they're really good at, I ended up kind of changing a lot of the structure and said, I'm going to take that away from this person. Not just I'm going to, exert my influence on them and say, I'm the boss, you need to do this. I'm like, actually, I can get somebody else to do this, that they're pretty good at it and they're more kind of wired for this. This frees the salesperson up to be a salesperson, and they're playing to their strengths. The other person's playing to their strengths. If I give the other person some additional responsibility from the others, I make it up to them. They get a raise or they get these other ones, that it doesn't have to be a zero sum game.
Are some of those tips that you're talking about there, can they also be used in personal relationships or in your personal life?
I think so. I don't speak to that as much in the book. It's more about, you know, um, career and work things. But these types of conversations come up all the time with my coaching clients. And it's a similar thing, that it's like, if you have all of these talents and these things that you're really good at, one of the things that I say is, can you start doing some of those things outside of work in your personal life? For example, if you're,
Yeah.
if among your top 5 real strengths is one that you're not doing as much at work, but you're really good at it, you could do it as maybe a side hustle. You do it on the weekend so that you're flexing those muscles. And who knows, as you do that over the course of a year, you could find that as a way to either add on to your job, or it might open up something else. So as opposed to just saying, this is going to be outside the scope of my current job and I'm just not going to lean into these skills. Find another way to do it, because you're working 40 hours a week, but you've got another 40 hours, try to do it that way. But if it relates to relationships and that and such, that's not something I normally lead with in my conversations.
But you do talk about ways people can improve their lives, and in fact, you talk specifically about 3 ways that people can improve their lives. Maybe run that down, because there's got to be some overlap between the work world and your personal world.
So absolutely. And I would say the number one thing that I recommend people do is to ask themselves the following question. Do it somewhere where they're quiet and they can think about the answer, and ideally even write it down. So there's a British gentleman named Peter Crone, who's this really great kind of life coach. And he said something. He said, who would you be in the absence of your concerns? So it
Mm.
doesn't ask you what your concerns are. It just says, and this, it's just a question you're asking, opening it up inside yourself. Who would I be in the absence of my concerns? And for me, when I first thought of that, I was like, wow, I'd feel a lot lighter. I wouldn't be worrying about the things that I worry about. If that was off of my to do and my to worry list, I would let it rip more in business, or I would let it rip more in my social life, or any of these things. I would enjoy the moment more. I would do all these things. Whatever your answers are to those questions, and particularly as maybe it relates to work, that's a North Star that nobody else can give you. That's what your soul just told you you would be if you weren't worried. And so I always recommend that people do that and then just write it down, kind of stream of consciousness, because that's opening up a window to yourself that is like, wow, that's who I'm capable of being if I can overcome these fears that are debilitating me. Not necessarily debilitating, maybe holding you back from being the free version of yourself.
Well, I can speak personally; they can be debilitating.
Mm.
I've held myself back for so long on many issues, and it's just within even the past year or two that I've felt like, okay, I need to take some more chances. This podcast being one of them. There's
What
lots of people
prompted you?
joking out that every middle-aged guy has a podcast, and yeah, but I had some broadcast background, and I wanted to give it a shot, and so here I am. Um, Anyways,
And
I've
so how do
always
you
played
feel
it
about it
safe.
now? Like, so if I had asked you that question, before you did this, and you would had it in your head, there's like, you know what, I would give it a shot to do the podcast. How do you feel now that you've actually done it?
It feels great,
Yeah.
actually. It's a
Right.
little, I mean, there are things about it that I didn't see coming, I didn't
Of
realize.
course.
But overall, I really, really, really enjoy it. it's almost become a second full-time job, which I'm trying to make it, hopefully, as I get more, accustomed to doing this, that it won't be that. But yeah, I definitely agree with that advice, and challenging your fears, or what can you do if your fears, and I've done this, and sometimes not many people watch, and that could be discouraging, but then you get an episode for whatever reason hits a nerve, and it does well. So just keep going on, and my family's been supportive, so that helps.
I love that. Yeah, there's another quote around fear by Robin Sharma, and he says, uh, "The fears we don't face become our limits." And I think
Mm,
that that's so accurate as well. Is the things that we know that are there, but we then don't address them and don't try to overcome them. That becomes the edge. That becomes where we stop. And the whole idea, oftentimes they say, is fear is like it shrinks when you put light on it, or it shrinks when you decide that you are going to, give it a shot. And your example is the perfect one, right? And it didn't turn around that it's all, roses and ice cream all the time, but it's overall, it's great. And you're psyched that you did it. And it's giving you the energy of life.
it's totally true, totally true. Okay, so did we do one? Do we have two more things people can do to improve their lives?
Yeah. The second one is do an inventory of your strengths. And so the thing that I have people do, but they don't have to do this one, is this thing called the Clifton's Strength Finders that I mentioned that I did, right? And you go on and it takes you like 40 minutes to answer these questions. And then it gives you a printout, a feedback of your top 5 and your top 10. But I have people normally focus on their top 5 strengths and the things that you're really good at and how else you can be doing those, how else you can be maximizing them, as well as a little watch out. Like, for example, for me, it's like I'm very positive. So, they recommend then that I should be in roles and talking to people that I'm overall very positive. I can see where things are going. But then my watch out is don't try to get too positive too quickly with some people because they need to be pissed about it for a little bit, And
That's
and I'm like,
funny.
oh, that's actually pretty interesting. I should be aware of that. Like, don't try to default to it. Let them go through their pissed off phase or whatever. So I
Right.
recommend people doing an inventory of their strengths and at any stage, right? But a lot of times my clients are in their 20s, 30s, sometimes in their 40s. But even for me, like in my 50s of being able to do it, is that like the things that you're really good at, those are your superpowers. And you're actually put on earth here to be leveraging them. And if you don't, it's kind of like, I say it kind of like thumbing your nose at God. It's like, if you've been given these things, you should use them. And
Yeah.
when you then end up using them, you'll feel that this is actually meant for you. You're more kind of in flow than you
Right.
are like otherwise. And then the last thing, and it kind of ties into the first two, is I try to get people to think about how else can they be adapting what they're doing, how they're thinking, and how their habits are, with an eye towards where do you feel like you're in a rowboat, that it's you and it's all your effort, and sure, you're seemingly making progress, but it's all you. And as soon as you stop, it stops, and it's slow going and it's arduous. Is where can you turn this into a sailboat? Where is it that it's not like you're just going to sit back and let the wind take you wherever, but where can you be leveraging your better strengths, help from others, even your religious faith or anything beyond just saying I have to do it all on my own, because there's so much available to you, whether that's get a coach, whether that's, talk to somebody else, or more importantly, like lean into the things that you're really good at. Because if you've been grinding at something for a while, it's a notice that, there's another way. It's either not do that way or look for some help. And so it doesn't have to be a grind. You don't have to be in a rowboat by yourself.
So we talked a little bit about your life in the corporate world, your very scary health um, situation that you had a few years back. Uh, was it all these things that prompted you to kind of write the book, or is it a culmination of life experiences? What What prompted you to do this?
So I think it's definitely a culmination. And as I've been, so I was given an executive coach when I was at Google, and she was so impactful for me that I was like, at some point when I get an opportunity to be that, after I've done some other things, I definitely want to do it. So I've been doing this now for like 4 years, got the certification and been working with my clients. But the balls and brains part of it, I really did it as like getting back to kind of my blue collar roots, and even just so many of the friends that I have is I find a lot of guys don't want to ask for help, and they don't, they're not really into any of those things. They don't really want to talk about it. And it ends up becoming a catastrophizing thing. It's all or the other. If I open up on this thing, or if I open up, I become soft, or any of these things. And so I wrote this as kind of an onboarding, an easy invitation for guys to be able to say, all right, listen, I can help you live a better life career wise, if you follow this particularly balls part of it, just like actually take inventory of what holds you back. Because as opposed to just trying to like ignore it or push it down or grind it, you don't have to be that way. And I'm not expecting guys who resist that to fully embrace it straight out of the gate. I needed to give it almost like a Trojan horse, that it's like, listen, just talk about it this way. I'm a regular guy. I've been through all these things. At least it's an invitation on this. So what I found is that it's been working. It resonates with guys. And then they end up then saying, you know what, I'd actually like to work with you and go through kind of the next steps on how I get myself from good to great on it. So that's the reason why I wrote the book, is as uh, kind of an accessible way for guys to connect with making their lives better.
So one thing I want to clear up with the title, and that is when you talk about balls and brain, when you say balls, it's a little PG, okay, but you're talking about like having the fortitude to move forward, because sometimes as guys, we all know that guy, and maybe we are that guy who you've thought with your balls when you should have been thinking with your brain.
Mhm.
And I don't, that's not exactly where you're at with
No.
this.
Right, they used to say sometimes all balls, no brains, right? No, on
Right.
this is what I end up saying in these things is oftentimes when guys will reference saying another guy has balls, I'm like, who do you say have
Right.
balls? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, all right, so I bet you say that because that guy doesn't seem to be afraid of something you're afraid of. So for example, a guy that was able to get up on stage in front of, thousands of people or hundreds of people and doesn't get nervous about it. Um, a guy who does get nervous about it would be like, wow, that guy has balls. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's an inside job that you end up saying that they're saying. So these things that ascribe to somebody else, what is that telling you about a fear that you might have? And so then what I do in the book on these things is, as opposed to telling them, suck it up or try harder, or, don't be, somebody who just gives in on these things, I end up introducing that whole idea of like thought, emotion, and action. Like when this is happening, what's your thought, what's your emotion, what's your action? So I referenced it earlier in the conversation that it's like at Google, when I'd get an opportunity to maybe get this new project to do, sometimes my thought would be like, oh boy, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then it's going to expose me. And then my emotion was anxiety. And then my action was avoidance. And so
Mm.
where I end up working with people and ended up doing for me is that my thought can be different on that. So when that happens, as opposed to thinking this is something I could screw up, I'm actually thinking like, this is actually an opportunity for me, that I can learn something. I can actually look good doing it. I could add something onto my resume. I could do these things. So if that's now my new thought, my emotion is not anxiety, and my emotion is actually excitement, right? And so, fear and excitement are essentially the same emotion. It's just a different thought. And then my action, instead of before being avoidance, my action is like, let's go. So that's a great thing to be able to map out for people. But again, it's not just like, okay, good. Now I've hypnotized you and you're going to change. It's more like give somebody an awareness around their triggers, their thoughts, emotions, and their actions. And what can you do to kind of reprogram that? And so when this happens, what's a replacement thought that will trigger this emotion and this action, and build this up as a muscle? So that's how I end up then encouraging guys, particularly, to be able to look at these things, because it feels like, all right, I can do that. That's achievable. And I'm not expecting that I'm just going to get it done overnight, but it's going to take me some reps like you would if you were working out.
So most of us as guys know what a coach is. You know, if you've played sports or even if you were in the just taking gym class, you know what a coach is. But what is a professional coach and what do they do? Who's like the target that you're working with and how do they benefit from the things that you provide?
Sure. So I work with both men and women, and from early in their careers to mid-career or later. I either get hired by people individually or through their company, and their company then ends up putting them in a program with a coach. And it can be different depending upon the needs of different people. So a lot of times companies will be like, this person's at this stage in their career and we need to get them some coaching on these things. So it's flexible in that way. But what I try to then kind of put a stake in the ground and say, this is kind of the framework that I use for everybody. And then we can alter it depending upon what you need and where you are, is I normally start with strengths. And as you know, in the book, I start with fears. It's just because the hook is balls and brains. And so I start with the strengths and the stuff that you're really good at. And then I end up going into, so we do this Clifton's strength finders. And then the fears part of it, we take an Enneagram, which is both a personality test as well as it unveils how fear shows up for you. So it's interesting because then you can overlap the Enneagram and the Clifton's strength finders about why you act the way you do and what the drivers are behind these things. And then if we can kind of flash some light on it and then map that against any kind of difficulties or growth opportunities they've had at work, a lot of times it gets exposed there. And so after we now have a real clear sense on your strengths, on what you want in your company wants you to be doing more of, the things that have been kind of holding you back, as well as how you would interact better with your boss and people around you, we then reset goals based upon this new knowledge. And then the goals are then established on what they are. And then the last two parts of it is where the rubber meets the road. And sometimes people fall down, is what's the new mindset that is going to be required for this? And it's, as opposed to just saying, okay, you can go do this, see you later. What's the mindset that is going to need to be different maybe than what you currently have been doing? And then lastly, habits. So mindsets are kind of like habits of thought, but what are the actual habits of the things you need to be doing on a daily and a weekly basis to make this actually come to life in real life? And so that ends up giving them not just a roadmap, but a thing for me to check in with them on, so that I make sure that it takes, and we're not just feeling at the end of it as like, oh, I think that was productive. It's more like, no, we've mapped out exactly how we were going to, grade this and establish and measure success. And so that's how we do it.
It sounds so much. I ran cross country in high school, and I remember our coach giving us a guide. You know, you're going to run this many miles this day, and it would give us a week or a month plan. And your goal is to, knock 15 seconds a mile off, or whatever. We had a goal, and it way you described it really reminded me of it says the same thing, but in a professional type of situation.
Well, because the nature of it, and he saw that clearly, and you saw it, and it worked, is that he can be your coach and he can tell you, what you need to do. And believe me, it'll work, but you need to do it. So that ends
Right.
up being the thing, a coach and a coachee, is that, I hold people accountable, and that's what I'm getting paid to do. But like, if I'm only talking to them once a week or they're checking in with me a couple of times in it, they're with themselves 24/7. So I need them to take this personal responsibility. So I try to structure it so it doesn't feel overwhelming, and they actually have a plan the way that your running coach had.
I'm curious. So you're in the business of helping people, advising people. What's the best advice you've ever gotten yourself?
Practice gratitude every day, because
Mm.
I think it rewires your brain and then rewires your world around you. Right? So it's like if you change the way you look at the world, the world you see changes. Is that practicing gratitude is the highest way to, not only raise your energetic vibration, but, to thank God for every day that you're here. And I think it attracts to you then more good things. I remember hearing someone say an analogy about whether it's God or the universe. They get sick of giving presents to people who don't say thank you. right? Like if you were to give a present, keep giving gifts to somebody and he or she never thanks you for it, whereas somebody else does, it feels good to someone says thank you. So you're going to keep giving gifts to people who say thank you, right? And so that's been the biggest thing for me is I think that it's taken me from good to great. Not that I'm like, oh my, patting myself on the back, but feeling very connected to my work and the world around me.
I tell you what you're talking about really hits home with me, and it's some of the things I'm trying to practice now, and I think you've taught me some more things just during our short conversation. And I'm curious if people are watching this and they want to work with you, or their company may benefit from your services. How can they get a hold of you?
Thank you. So I try to keep it as easy as possible. So my name is Chris Woods with an S, right? And ever since I was a kid, people were like, that sounds like a fake name. It's so easy. I'm like, it's my real name. So I'm Chris Woods and I'm a coach. So my website is chriswoodscoach.com. So there you can see information on the book Balls and Brains, how I work with people, testimonials from other, happy clients, as well as a way to message me directly from there.
Perfect. And again, the book Balls and Brains, we can get it at your website, available
It's
on Amazon as well.
exclusively on Amazon, but if you just go to chriswoodscoach.com, you can click to it straight from there. And it's a quick read, 104 pages. It's got nothing but 5-star reviews so far, and that's a testament. I think that nobody wants their money back. So
Well, I think I'll be ordering it. I have not had a chance to read it, but I've enjoyed our conversation and some of the insights you brought. And I've experienced many of the things that you talk about, and I think I could benefit from reading that. So I plan to order it myself. I want to thank you for being on the show and taking time with us. I know that you're a busy man, but I appreciate you sharing some of your wisdom with us today.
thank you, Dave. This has been a really enjoyable conversation. I really do appreciate your inviting me on.
Chris Woods, certified professional coach, Balls and Brains, a framework for living your best life by overcoming fears and maximizing strengths. Get it on Amazon or at his website. And thanks again so much for being on the show.
And thank you for tuning in to Dave Wants to Know. We really do appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a whole bunch. We'll see you next time.